Happen to see a story at something called Daily Caller. I'm going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes, but just a reminder, we have a number of things on the docket this morning. Harry Reid is retiring from the U.S. Senate when he finishes up this term. That announcement coming early this morning, just before we went on the air. In fact, we'll have some details about that coming along. For those folks who may be tuning in across the state line in Nevada, I don't know if it's an occasion for celebration, but for many of us, it certainly is. Also, College of Southern Idaho, Doug Mon is going to be, I believe, in studio with us today because that means Ella Donahue is still in New Orleans, where she has been checking out all of the fine cuisine during the course of her spring break. When I was in college, spring breakers always went to places in Florida. But it seems now that people have gotten more discerning because in Florida, all you do is hang around on the beach. I know it's very difficult. And there were always these drinking parties and people falling off balconies, and usually to their deaths. I never got involved with that. My parents wouldn't allow me to take part. And people say, well, you were 18, you could have made up your own decisions. No, you didn't live in my household. Believe me, it did not work that way. So she is in New Orleans, which is a much more cultural type of center. And I guess if you really are looking to learn something, even during the course of a spring break, go to New Orleans, or you could go to Santa Fe. You could pick any number of cities like that have some history behind them, and I think get a really good, solid appreciation of how people in the other part of the country may live. But the thing I really wanted to talk about at the beginning this morning, there was a column by the name of W. James Antle III. Yes, that does sound very formal, doesn't it? He is a writer with the Daily Caller. Why the Bo Bergdahl charges are bad for Iran deal. Now, as you know, Bo Bergdahl is a young man. I'll be 29 this coming weekend. He's 28 right now. His birthday is coming up in just a few days. Will he be celebrating that on base in the brig or with family? I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out at this point. And I don't think the family's going to be talking about that much either over the next few months until they actually figure out what's going to happen with this fellow's future. But why would it have an impact on the Iran deal? Well, this is the rationale of the writer at the Daily Caller. And just before I mention that, we should note 37 at our studios. Looking for a fairly nice day today, a little cooler this weekend, and then we have a ping-pong effect going on with the weather. Some warm temperatures at the beginning of next week, some cooler temperatures in the middle of next week. I guess we're into that springtime era now, where we're going to see things just zigzag back and forth before it suddenly breaks out and is just very, very warm. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online. Means you can take us anywhere you want, all over the world. Just click on the Listen Live icon, and voila, there is KLIX. The writer says the charges against Bo Bergdahl are not merely embarrassing to the White House, which they would be, of course. They will further undermine the already shaky confidence in the Obama White House's nuclear negotiations with Iran. Now, why is that? Think about this for a moment. He botched the Bergdahl release, traded 5 cutthroats for Bergdahl, 3 of whom I heard yesterday are already back on the battlefield, with 2 others likely going to be heading back there as well. And they'll be planning attacks on, well, American troops. That's what they have been doing or had been doing for years before they were captured. The writer goes on to say the latest revelations about Bergdahl come as the Obama administration is trying to negotiate a deal that would restrict, but not dismantle, Iran's nuclear program with a minimum of congressional involvement. You know, this is not just Republicans complaining. The chorus is getting very, very loud among Democrats about this, not only in the House and Senate. But we need to tell you, too, as well, you've got 2 former Obama administration officials, cabinet officials, saying that this is a really bad idea. The latest being Leon Panetta, who both served as chief of the CIA and as defense secretary. And then you had General Petraeus come out a couple of weeks ago and say pretty much the same thing. He served as the CIA director for a time. And also he was the man behind the surge in Iraq. So these are people who know what they're talking about in that part of the world, and they're both saying their boss has gone off the rails, or their old boss has gone off the rails. So you understand that the problem that we're seeing right now is there's a pattern developing. Bergdahl is just one factor in that. Iran is another, but it's not the only factor, or they're not the only factors at this point. The writer says anything that erodes trust is bad for getting lawmakers and voters on board with any Iran pact. This includes things that don't have anything to do with Iran. President Obama, he says, promised that under Obamacare, if you like your health plan or doctor, you would be able to keep them. That promise turned out to be untrue. You don't have to be a very clever wordsmith to argue Obama is saying to Iran, if you like your nuclear program, you can keep your nuclear program. Closer to the issue at hand, the president, he says, not so long ago declared anti-terror efforts in Yemen a success. Some called it the Yemen model. So now you've got his press secretary, who was even on Morning Joe on MSDNC yesterday, claiming that Yemen is still a success, even as the liberal hosts were saying to him, yeah, but the president fled on a boat. The president of Yemen got on a boat and got the heck out of there. His country has been taken over by terrorists. Yes, but we have some people still on the fringes listening in. It's Orwellian, and it's almost as if they think everyone else is believing their baloney. But Bergdahl is just the tip of that iceberg if you start to really think about it for a moment. And then you think about the fact that they've just released all of the details, secret details, of the Israeli nuclear program. These have been under wraps for 30 years. And releasing them, I guess, is just to try and embarrass the Prime Minister of Israel. But by releasing them, the details are so precise that it will give the Iranians and anyone else looking to build a nuclear weapon details on how you do it, because it explains how the Israelis managed to get weapons that were far more powerful in their explosive ability than many of the superpowers have. And the Obama White House has just unveiled this. In fact, the story wasn't picked up until just this week. But apparently the Iranians have known about it for a month. Before Mr. Netanyahu even spoke to the U.S. House of Congress, or two houses of the U.S. Congress, the joint session. So what we're dealing with is a man in the White House who's gone rogue and probably traitorous as well. He could do well to sit with Bergdahl at that inquiry, at that court-martial, and maybe the two of them could go off and be roommates in a prison somewhere. Bergdahl, we should note, his lawyer has issued a statement saying that Bo never really intended to desert. Oh, yes, he left. But he planned to come back now, is the story we're hearing. So you're in the middle of a desert in Afghanistan. You don't know anyone else there but the people you serve with. You know that out in those hills there are cutthroats who will look to chop the heads off any American they come across, gouge their eyes out, castrate them, lop their heads off, whatever else, and you say, I think I'm going to go for a walk. Speaking of straining credulity, it's not just the Obama White House, it's the lawyer for Bergdahl, when he says Bergdahl is only AWOL because he intended to come back. And then the lawyer for Bergdahl argues if he was only AWOL, then he is only subject to 1 month confinement. And now they're concocting this story about how he was tortured and held in captivity in cages and strapped to beds and everything else, just to try their best to win some sympathy for him. I don't think that military officers are the most sympathetic types of people. Also, the Bergdahl lawyer says the evidence that there were troops who were actually killed while looking for him is flimsy. Wait a minute. You have patrols that went out in search of him, and members of those patrols either ended up dead from bullets or from improvised explosive devices, that is, landmines and the like. And yet, he is saying that there's no evidence of this? If you are killed on a patrol, and that patrol, the object is to find Bergdahl, then yes, there is more than just a faint connection between the two. If this is the way that Bergdahl and his people work, then I guess we can say the fellow was raised by people who were not very good parents. And that does reflect poorly on his community, which, as we were talking about yesterday, is filled with liberals. And they're not people who would wave the flag. They are not people who probably have much of a celebration on Independence Day. And they are certainly people who apparently have issues with men and women in uniform. Despite all of these claims by this lawyer, there are all of these letters from Bergdahl home to his family complaining about the military and dissing his country. And now they're claiming, well, he didn't really intend to go to India either. You've got witnesses, multiple witnesses. It's not just one, but you've got a dozen guys all saying that he was spouting off about it. Why do people, when there is so much overwhelming evidence, insist on staying with these lies? I don't understand it. It's 8:16. Bill Colley with you, 37. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Why did he go AWOL according to his lawyer? Because he was going to go see a commanding general so he could tell him there was bad stuff going on in his unit. Why didn't he just mention it to his superiors, his immediate superiors? Because now he says they were bad people. So you see what's going on here. Everyone else in his unit was apparently bad. And all of those guys who ended up dying while searching for him, maybe they inflicted those killings, maybe it was suicide, they killed themselves. We're expected to believe such a web of deceit here that it completely boggles the mind. And if this is what they produce in Haley, Idaho, then I don't want any part of it. Because if he is indicative of the people who live in that area, we have a cancer growing within the state of Idaho. We're coming up on 8:18. I've got a break in a couple of minutes, but if you'd like to reach us this morning, in fact, I'll tell you some simple ways to do that. You could reach us by telephone, 736-0300. That is 736-0300. You can also get in touch with us online by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And that last name is spelled Colley, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And I do take a look at the email. As I said yesterday, not as frequently, I suppose, as I take a look at the telephones. But I find that the email, every once in a while, when I get to a break, I can take a look at it. And sometimes there's some very good points people make, sending them my way. And oftentimes they're not near a telephone, or it's a small enough community where sometimes a topic is so volatile. Instead of letting everyone hear your voice and all of your neighbors go, "Hey, that's Joe," sometimes an email, confidential email, is a little easier for people and they can respond that way. And I'm okay with that. I understand some of those pressures that may happen when you're in that situation and you're looking for some sort of response. Also wanted to mention, coming up in a few minutes, I believe it's going to be Doug Mon, unless he's lined up someone else. But Doug is in the building from the College of Southern Idaho, and what we do is we do a weekly rundown of events that are taking place at the college, whether over the weekend or coming up very soon. So Doug will be filling in today, I believe, for Ellen Donahue, who, as I mentioned, she right now is in New Orleans, Louisiana. Lucky, lucky girl. And she is down there on spring break. She'll be back with us next week. So we'll have some details coming from those folks, one of them or some designated hitter, in just a matter of a few minutes. And I also, if we get a chance, want to talk a little bit later in this hour about the state salamander. It now is going to the desk of the governor. So with the approval of Governor Otter, we'll have a salamander, a state salamander, and that's on the way. More details on that if you can stick around for a few minutes. Bill Colley with you. And this is News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also online, newsradio1310.com. Once more, you can hear us anywhere all over the world if you tune in online. Well, for scheduling reasons, our victims from CSI may be up with us in the next break. Jackie is keeping them busy in the next studio with all sorts of questions and just, peppering them with one detail after another. So when that's done, I expect we'll see them in the next segment or sometime soon. But in the meantime, you're listening to well, in fact, I want to point out, you can listen to us online first. Usually I do that second, but there are some people out there. Online has become the choice. Do you know in Los Angeles, they did a survey of radio, especially people listening to talk radio. Now more than half the people who are tuned into talk radio are listening online, usually at their offices, where they can quietly sit at their desks with their headsets on perhaps, and no one knows what they're listening to. Well, if you're listening to Rush Limbaugh in the middle of the day at the office, you might have issues, because a lot of these politically correct people would claim that they were offended by something like that. So you almost have to be a closet admirer of talk radio in order to get away with that in some workplaces. I also wanted to remind you about our good friends at Western States Bus Services this morning, where they are hiring part-time bus drivers, split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour, and keep in mind, they train you for all of this. They have a big course down in the Filer area, and they can take you out and do all of that training, and by the time you're done, you're ready to hit the road. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Also, coming up next Wednesday morning between 8:20 and 9 o'clock right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, we have Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. And of course, we expect Dr. Jonathan Tripp to be along and sit down and have a discussion with us. Dr. Tripp is asking people who are tuning in, especially those mothers, young moms, people with children who have a lot of questions, of course, about various pediatric issues. He's asking you to give him some thoughts on what you'd like to hear about on the program. And we've already discussed a great many topics on the show, from vaccinations the very first week, and what we've done is sort of branched out now with all of that. But he's telling you, give him a call, let him know what you think and what issues are important to you and your family when it comes to your better health. And of course, he'll be along, as I said, next Wednesday in studio with us. And that happens every week right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com between normally 8:30 and 9 o'clock, but we're doing an extended version next Wednesday. Trip Family Medicine is located across from the main post office on Fillmore Street. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. Do want to point out, you are listening to Bill Colley this morning on Top Story, and you can reach me at 736-0300. Also by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. We have a caller with us. You're up next. It's 8:26.
Good morning, Bill. This is a guy called. I have evidence on documentation on what I called in yesterday when you called me a cuckoo. Remember?
Yeah. In fact, I think that you're a little off your nut, but go ahead.
Okay. The document where Cheney ordered the NORAD to stand down is called. It's titled "Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Instruction." The document number is CJCSI 3610.01A. And then you can go to YouTube, punch up Norman Netta, Transportation Secretary's testimony on 9/11 Commission, where he states, you watch that tape, you'll see that he is stating that Cheney is upholding that command for NORAD to stand down and will not release them.
Can I tell you a little story? I happen to know personally two pilots with the 174th Air Tactical Fighter Wing of the New York Air National Guard who were in the air, and their job that morning was to shoot down these planes before they actually got to their destinations. So we had planes in the air ready to do that. Unfortunately, by the time they got into the air and they were flying, it was determined it was too late. In fact, we'd already had the strikes in Washington and the plane down in Pennsylvania and the strikes in New York. They were up there, though, because there was also some fear that there would be other planes around. Now, you just said he called NORAD off. How is it that these two men ended up in the air and their mission was to shoot down terrorists that day?
These people were not coming from the bases there that were local to protect those cities. These bases were coming from, I don't remember the name of the base, but it was long, far off. You say you know who they are. You probably know where they came from. Well, NORAD stood down. You watch the testimony of Norman Netta, and he'll prove that Dick Cheney didn't order it.
When you say the bases are far away, why would we call on someone from Colorado to go shoot down planes that are flying over Washington and New York? You had the guys who were in New York and the Rome, New York area too as well, which is the former home of the Griffiths Air Base, who were also involved. So once again, tell me, how do you justify this when I just told you there were people in the air that morning and they were trying to fulfill that mission?
When you say there were people in the air, if they're ordered not to fire, what good are they doing in the air, Bill?
Because the planes had already struck the targets.
But they hadn't struck the Pentagon.
They struck the Pentagon in that very same time frame. This all happened. I was working that morning in a newsroom, and I was watching all of this on closed-circuit TV. Man. So I've gone to the internet. I found all of this false information that's being pumped out there by people who are looking to sell books and make money. And I've been listening to George Norrie throughout the overnights, and, the Anunnaki may have been involved too as well, and all sorts of other space creatures, very slimy ones too. Some of them actually resemble the former vice president. And obviously, with that note, we should take a short break. I found this evidence that people made up, but it's good fiction. Take a look at it. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I've got to fess up, I don't like snow, but I ended up working 15 years of my broadcast career in Syracuse, New York, which is, they're getting snow this weekend, which is not unusual. It can snow there into late April. It snowed a couple of times on Mother's Day over the last 20 years. So it's a climate you don't want to live in. On the other hand, in the 2 months of summer, very, very pretty around the area with the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes and the Adirondack Mountains and the Catskills off to the southeast. When I was first working there, the Gulf War broke out, the first Gulf War, and I spent a great deal of time at the local Air Guard base because they took some of those planes, those F-16s, and they were involved in that war. Because they nationalized a lot of these people in the Guard units. That was the new model, and it's still with us today. So I got to know a lot of the people who were flying those planes in and out of there, and I got to know a great many people in command. And then I moved away. I moved away to take a job in a couple of different cities in television for a few years. And after a 6-year absence, I came back to the area and I worked for a few more years. And I was out at the base one day doing a story again, and most of the faces that I had known had already retired by then. And I met two men. I was standing in the area of the administrative office where they have a small room with a lot of awards and trophies and the like. And I don't know if you actually call them trophies in the military, but I was standing there and I was talking to these two guys while I was waiting for the base commander to come by. And they told me that they had been scrambled. They went up into the air. Now, all of you conspiracy people out there, you've got to realize you cannot know that these terrorists had this plan in mind by osmosis. If you had extrasensory perception, you could have sat there the day before and said, I bet tomorrow morning terrorists are going to hijack planes. So we'll be up in the air and shoot them down. If I had that kind of extrasensory perception, I would go get the terrorists first before they actually got on board the planes, right? So we already know that this is absolute foolishness what this guy keeps sharing with us on the air. Because the next morning when it became apparent what was going on, and they didn't know how many more there might be up in the air, they scrambled these guys. And all of this was coming out of NORAD, of course, is based out here, in Colorado. But most of the work that was going on that morning was coming out of the former Griffiths Air Base in Rome, New York, which is about half an hour's drive east of Syracuse. I was at Griffiths, by the way, when the main mission, the B-52s used to fly out of there. I was there when the last B-52 flew out, and they ended that mission. Very, very sad day at the time when that transpired. And then there was some talk about turning the base into a NASCAR track. That never materialized. But here's the thing. They got the orders, and the closest planes were out there at the Air Guard base in Syracuse at Hancock Field. And they flew out, but while they were out, it was determined that there were no more planes, and all the 4 planes were already down or had struck their targets, and these men were called off. And I never got a chance to say to them, hey, how does it feel to be told you have to go up there and shoot down a plane filled with your fellow Americans? I never got that chance to bring that question up. But when I hear these twisted kooks, goofballs, nutcases that call up with these types of conspiracy theories, it just irritates the heck out of me because I know that those two brave men, what they intended to do that day, and they were going to do it because they felt they needed to do it, because no one knew how many more planes there might be up there otherwise. And so a lot of people are out there reading all of these conspiracy theories because it matches up with what they want to believe about the world, or because they have some sort of hate for their country or an individual politician. The biggest enemy this country has right now is in our White House. And Mr. Cheney might not have been everybody's cup of tea, but when he said that this war on terror would go on for 50 years, which he did, it was in a speech 1 month after 9/11. He's absolutely right, because we're seeing a continuance of it right now with the Middle East in flames. You can reach our program today at 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next.
Hey, good morning, Bill. Hey, the only lie that they found on President Bush was the Iraq War, saying there was no weapons of mass destruction. Well, then they found those weapons. My nephew was over there, and he found some before they even announced it on TV the other day. But this, seemed that he lied. And then, just like you just said, this kind of White House now, every time he opens his mouth, it's a lie.
Yeah. When it came down to weapons of mass destruction, I remember talking to a congressman at the time by the name of Sherwood Boehlert. He's since retired and off playing golf somewhere. But Boehlert was telling me, he said, we keep thinking weapons of mass destruction are on 100-foot missiles, but he said, you're talking about little tiny vials of chemicals. He said, which you could put into a little chemical rack, stick into the glove compartment of a car, and drive them to Damascus, Syria. We also have some troops who were exposed to some of these chemicals who inadvertently blew up the depots where some of them were actually being stored. So now we know that they did exist. But it's funny, mainstream media doesn't want to really delve into too many details about all of this because they'd rather have us believe the narrative they created that Bush was lying.
Yes. And, we went there for oil also. Well, if we went there for oil, how come we're not using it?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you very much. Good question. And the price, of course, is going up again because of the Saudis taking on the Yemenis and now the Egyptians going in. I guess better them than all of us. But here you go. Why would it go up when we have so much dadgum oil here in the United States that we could use? Or if we had built the Keystone XL pipeline by now, or if we had started drilling in Anwar by now, we wouldn't have any of these worries whatsoever. But we do, and we have these worries because of Democrats. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. Hey, I've got more coming up in just a few minutes. Don't go away. In fact, I do want to talk about this estate salamander. Lots of reptiles out this morning. I am going to get to a couple of these stories from around the state of Idaho in a few minutes if I get a chance. But I also promised that we'll take some more telephone calls this morning if you are so inclined, even emails too. I just got a very funny text message from a friend of mine. He used to work as a federal narcotics agent, and I know him from back on the East Coast. He worked in suburban Washington, D.C. for many years. He's a Redskins fan. Forgive him, please. Actually, if I had a list of favorite football teams, they'd be in my top 5, but I know there are people out there, what? That racist football team? We'll get to that another day. But he writes, after hearing that conversation with the Ozone Boy, he says, gee, Bill, and I thought the liberal morons were only here in commie-wear. Referring to life back on the East Coast. While he was listening online this morning, which is what you can do if you're ever out of town, newsradio1310.com. You can hear us anywhere, all over the world, by just checking us out on the live stream on the internet. Also, News Radio 1310 KLIX. Our temperature, 39. It's 8:45. Bill Colley with you until 10 o'clock this morning. Unless, of course, my head suddenly, spontaneously explodes during the course of the morning when you consider some of the calls that I've already had. Do we have a caller with us right now? No. It's that guy from outer space again. Yes, he's being contacted. His handler's at Area 51. See, that series of beeps, what that means is, Dick Cheney did it. Dick Cheney did it. Dick Cheney did it. And he responds by, yes, master. See, they implanted something in his head when they captured him many, many years ago. He was out driving a back road, and they happened to come across him, and they sucked him up into the air just like that, and they put that chip in his head. And now whenever they want to badmouth Dick Cheney, they just put out that little beep, 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 and he just goes flying into action at that point. They must be monitoring this show, too, as well. I should be careful, because if I'm going to be out driving a dark, country road, they might come after me, and I'll be back here on Monday morning saying, Dick Cheney and George Bush did it. And I'll be spending my entire morning just repeating that over and over and over again. I found the truth on the internet. The internet never lies. Yes, the internet is a lot like our current occupant of the White House. Anyway, as I said, I've been trying this morning to mention something about Idaho's new reptile. And not, as I say, just the ones who call. The salamander admirers say resemble sections of, or admirers. Let's start that all over again. The salamander admirers say resembles sections of Idaho's topography is on its way to becoming Idaho's official state amphibian. The Idaho Senate voted 33-1 on Thursday. The proposal now goes to Governor C.L. Butch Otter for his signature. And it goes on to mention a 14-year-old boy had been lobbying for this change for many, many years, since he was 9, in fact. Now he knows what dealing with government is like. You see, for all of the people who criticize the adoptions of state cakes, state pies, state muffins, state amphibians, state birds, state hens, whatever it be, you forget a lot of times that this is done because people, young people, sometimes it's not just one young person, sometimes entire classrooms of young people at schools. This is an exercise in teaching them how the process of government works. And it doesn't take long. You don't understand. I think that people who criticize this saying, don't they have more important things to work on? Sure they do. But they didn't spend, hours in caucus debating the salamander bill. They've listened off and on for 5 years and then suddenly decided they would vote to approve this. So no one is really wasting any of your legislative time by doing it. And The young man has a valuable lesson in how this works. Likely this means he is going to go on. You'd be very proud of this young man if he happened to be your son, because what he has done is showed a lot of persistence. He could someday be one of our future leaders by doing something like this. His proposal was the first bill to be killed this legislative session in the House committee. However, that same panel revived it in a surprise vote last week, where it then quickly cleared each pending hurdle. The salamander lives almost exclusively in Idaho and can grow to be more than a foot long. And some of them actually get so big they pick up the telephone and they call the radio program, as we have witnessed the last couple of days. And another story coming from the state capitol. State Associated Press. Look, the AP, no matter where you go, is a very liberal outfit. And the AP works just as an aggregator of news. They have a handful of reporters, sometimes of their own. But the AP essentially gathers news from other sources, its members, and then repackages it, repurposes it, and then spits it back out. So newsrooms all across the state, if they are understaffed or somebody's out sick that day, have somewhat of a backup. This comes from the AP. Transportation funding. Now see if you can find a red flag, in this opening sentence. Two parts of a patchwork plan aiming to raise $46 million for Idaho's crumbling roads and bridges have passed a House panel. Now, reporters will tell you that they are not biased. Oh, they'll tell you that they do have, of course, their own personal beliefs. But the old line you always hear is, "We check those at the door." It's as if they're taking off a coat. "Oh, I'm getting rid of my beliefs for the time being." You hang up your beliefs on a rack, and you leave your beliefs there for 8 hours. I've never believed that. I've worked in enough newsrooms to know exactly what is going through the minds of most of these people. And oftentimes, they don't even realize their personal biases when they're writing a story or covering a story or the manner in which they ask questions. Two parts of a, quote, patchwork, unquote, plan. You see, by describing this is not an opinion piece, but by describing this as a patchwork, you are already targeting or tunneling an idea to the reader that this is a cobble job and it's not very good. Instead of just saying, here's the facts, here's what they're that they're going to spend, here's what they had planned on spending, that would allow people to make their own judgments. You might say after reading that, that's patchwork. But the fact of the matter is, they're leading you with this opening line into following their view on it, aren't they? We have a caller with us. It's 10 minutes from 9 o'clock, 39 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next. What's on your mind?
Yes, Bill. Hey, yesterday I heard on Rush Limbaugh, he was talking about how, well, in the past, we've never, ever really known for sure whether or not Israel had nuclear weapons or not. There was no verification on it. And yesterday, the way I understand it, this has all been exposed now, and all the neighboring countries of the world knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. And I thought to myself, what a low-down, dirty son of a, thing that this administration has done to our only ally in the world almost, it seems. And I just was wondering what you thought about it, and I'll hang up.
Yeah, I was mentioning it just in passing a little earlier today, and thank you for the call. Mentioning it a little earlier. It appears on as early as February 26th, if not earlier than that, the Iranians knew about this. And they had all the details. That report somehow ended up in the hands of the people in Tehran. And the problem here is that this report is so detailed. Apparently back in the middle of the 1980s, the Israelis had discovered with just a little bit of fissionable material how they could make bombs far more potent than anything that were in the arsenals of the United States and Soviet Union. So a small country is packing a really big wallop. But all of the scientific details are in this leaked report. And because of that, the Iranians and anybody else they decide to follow with a sponsorship throughout the Middle East now have access to all of this. So they can use just a minute amount of whatever material they have to build highly powerful nuclear weapons. Do you not understand what the President of the United States and his petulance has done here? He has unleashed the genie and could cause an all-out nuclear war. And if that's only a war in that part of the world, it will spread because, let's be honest about it, When we had the meltdown at that plant, that nuclear plant in Japan, you realize there's a lot of radioactive material still floating around out there in the waters and in the air. You do not confine a nuclear strike to just that one city or that one area where you're dropping that bomb. There is going to be fallout. It is going to blow in different directions. Some of it is going to end up in the ionosphere and various places in the stratosphere, and eventually it will make its way back down to Earth all around the planet. So we had tests going on in the 1950s and 60s in the Pacific on all of these atolls, and the Soviets at the time were doing a lot of tests, and it has now been determined that a lot of that radiation did get spread all over the planet. It may be cause for a lot of birth defects and other problems people are having still to this day. It doesn't go away after a few weeks or months. It sticks around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and just keeps decaying in half-life as it goes along. And now if you have the Iranians with a bomb and they start lobbing them back and forth with the Israelis, and the Saudis are going to get a bomb, the Egyptians are going to get a bomb, likely the Syrians will get a bomb, the Turks will get a bomb, and if all of a sudden in that area they start lobbing these things back and forth and maybe they blow up 20 of these very powerful devices, it is going to have a huge impact. Here's Mr. Obama constantly whining about global warming, climate change as they call it. Do you realize what just 20 bombs detonating in the Middle East would do to the worldwide climate? And this man is responsible for opening up Pandora's box and releasing this all around the world. And do you think if they fire off 20 of these weapons in that part of the world that everyone else is going to stand by and just say, well, let's hold on to ours for now? Because it could easily turn into something much, much wider than that. Bombs could start flying in from Europe, from Russia, from China, from the United States. And by golly, that may be the end times that the Iranians are really trying to bring about. And he has just assisted them by doing this. And the Israelis, to my knowledge, have been somewhat mum about this. Here's the thing. It was ensured that the Iranians had all of these details before Mr. Netanyahu even made his speech in Washington on March 3rd. The Iranians had all of the details last month. Why is that? And it's only becoming public knowledge now. Why aren't there impeachment hearings in Washington? This man, as I said earlier, has gone rogue. He is running a foreign policy that is nothing but incompetent. He has been telling us that, I'll give you a few examples. This comes from the Washington Examiner today. The headline, Obama can't maintain his Middle East Balancing Act. Lead editorial. If only the Obama White House could bring itself to admit its strategy in Yemen has failed, then Obama and his mouthpieces would look substantially less foolish. As an unintended consequence of his careless detachment from world events, he is now getting America involved in yet another war in Islamic lands. This time, he is helping the Saudi army bomb the same group of gun-toting religious fanatics that he himself was courting just a few months ago. If that doesn't seem absurd enough, the writer says, consider how Obama is straddling the region, trying to play both sides of a deeply divided Islamic world. In Iraq, he is helping Iranian-backed Shiite paramilitaries fight the Islamic State to the extent that they are willing to cooperate. In Yemen, he is helping the Saudis fight Iranian-backed paramilitaries. All the while, his negotiations with Iran appear highly likely to leave the Islamic Republic in a position to develop nuclear weapons in a relatively short period of time, much to the chagrin of Saudi Arabia. This is a balancing act he cannot maintain. So he's trying to play all sides against the other, and he's only making things worse. It's because he is so full of himself, he thinks he is such a genius that he thinks he can pull all of this off. And he may be bringing on World War III and perhaps the destruction of the planet. Over at MSNBC, they are asking him some questions, or at least his mouthpiece, Josh Earnest. This came from Mika Brzezinski. Should we dial back on the words that it is a success story when you have the president fleeing on a boat? She was asking about the Yemeni president, as he was apparently getting out of town as things were getting a little too hot there. Don't you see what we're up against right now? And we've got to deal with this fellow. We've been all saying, well, he's only going to be around a couple of more years. We don't have a couple of more years any longer. This is becoming more and more obvious every minute, not just every day, but every minute, that this is a highly dangerous character. And he, by the way, has his finger on the button, which makes you worry if we tried to take him out with the military, if some general finally had the cojones to come forward and say, you know what, it's time for a coup. This guy might start floating those missiles all over this country. I think he's that unhinged. I think he has become that unhinged. And all of his actions over the last couple of months certainly show that for us. Here's an analysis from Wesley Pruden in the Washington Times. He's a former editor of that newspaper. Just quickly, he says the president even loves Israel, but it's his way. Tough love to bring the Jews to heel. Just as the Secretary of State is topping up a deal to satisfy the mullahs in Iran, comes the news that the U.S. has declassified a 386-page report that reveals in minute detail Israel's super discreet nuclear program. And Pruden asks the question, why did the president do it? He says it contains information that might be useful as tips not only for Iran, but for other rogue governments with an itch to blow up the world in the service of Allah. Good golly. But for Mitt Romney, 858, for all of his character flaws and the fact that he may not have been a so-called true conservative, but for Mitt Romney. One more hour of the Bill Colley program. That is Top Story coming up on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. But first, we'll check the news from Fox at 9 o'clock. While I was having a debate in the last hour with a conspiracy theorist who was telling me Dick Cheney was responsible for 9/11 and he has seen all of the details on the internet, which the rest of us haven't yet been enlightened to, apparently, I had a friend who was actually, we talk all the time about people listening online. You can hear us anywhere around the world. And so when I say tune into News Radio 1310 KLIX or newsradio1310.com, a lot of people are doing the latter. And that includes my good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil, who is joining us on the telephone this morning. Welcome back. Are you with us? Oh, hey, Steve. Hello. All right. He may put me on hold for a moment. We're coming up on 8 minutes after 9 o'clock, 41 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. And I'm trying to figure out where he has gone for the moment. But he had texted me during the course of the last few minutes and said,
Okay.
You're there.
Am I
Okay.
back?
Yes, you are. You heard that individual. You didn't call him an individual, I think, but you heard this person on the air talking about 9/11 and the conspiracy theories. We should point out, you spent 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. That career took you from Southeast Asia, all over the United States as well, a brief time with the Thunderbirds, as well as a long time with the Pentagon. So you even worked on Capitol Hill as the liaison to Congress for a number of years. So you have a pretty wide experience. We could say that, right?
I guess you could.
Okay. What was your take on this fellow's comments?
Well, my only take is there is no end to the stupidity and lame-brainedness of these conspiracy theorists around the country. They only go on the internet to find what other of their ilk put out there without any kind of thought or research. You know, this guy, I don't know what his name is. You know what my real his name for him is, but I won't repeat it on the radio. And I would hope he'd call in again. I'd love to debate him, but he won't because people like that are flaming cowards. But
well, we could set something up sometime.
Oh, okay, I'll be glad to do that.
Sure. But, you know, when you just mentioned that they gravitate to only the evidence they want to hear or see, and that
Right.
they don't, that they either discount or they refuse to acknowledge anything else.
Right, and you know, if they were really serious, they would talk to someone and other than the other kookballs that are out there and get at least another insight. But they don't want that, and that's been their agenda all along to discredit, particularly the Bush-Cheney era, and what we've got now is much worse. But that's another subject. But
well, we should also point out, you know, the Bush family quite well because before the inaugural in 1985. You actually helped plan that, so you moved in and lived with the then Vice President Bush and his family for a matter of weeks, getting all of the plans together. We're living in the same house with them at the residence, so you know what these people are like. You know what their character is like, and you know you may disagree with them on some political issues, but I think your point is they're decent people.
Yes, they are. You couldn't ask for better people. And the thing that about them and President Reagan that really we didn't appreciate like we do now is that they were true patriots. Unlike what we have as a so-called
Yes.
commander and leader now, who is an abomination, absolute abomination.
Now, some years ago, you brought a fellow by the studios when I was working at another radio station. He's from Utah, and you had served with him. He also served as Undersecretary of Defense in the most recent Bush White House. And he obviously would have had to be involved in this conspiracy as well, but I found him to be a really stand-up guy.
Well, yes. Again, he puts America first, and that's why he was part of that administration.
Was that Chuck Williams, right? Was that the
name? That was Chuck Williams. And,
right. He ran for Congress once. Ran for Congress in Utah.
In Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've had all of the experience with all of these people and worked on Capitol Hill and the like. And it's got to be distressing to see the country coming apart when all of these people are, if we could have if people had some sensible arguments, but when they veer off into the insane arguments, it's got to be very, very disappointing.
Oh, it is, and this will go on forever, obviously, only because it is just absolutely ludicrous. You have to be crazy to think that one man, Dick Cheney, who orchestrated what happened on 9/11, is absolutely beyond comprehension that anybody could be that stupid that they would even think that that was remotely possible.
And if they had tried to even do this, we're talking not even a full year into the administration. They were in office 8.5 months. You couldn't possibly pull such an elaborate plan, hoax, and attack like that together in such a short time.
Oh, to what end? To what end? It's just, I probably ought to ring off because I'm going to probably start saying things that you don't want to hear on the air.
Steve, that's why I have the delay here. We installed it just for you.
Okay. Okay. You're a smart man, Bill.
Well, hey, give my best to Linda and to the new kitty cat. And
Hank.
I saw Hank's picture.
Character.
How old is Hank?
Yeah.
He's got to be what?
He's
6 or 7?
About 8 months. He's about 8 months old, I guess.
Okay, we need to point out the Hiles have adopted a new cat from the neighbors. And with your 15-year-old cat, Sophie, you're trying to make sure that this is a loving family. And it looks like it's working out so far.
Sophie's behaving herself.
Yes. Well, good luck with the new family member, and we'll talk to you sometime soon, I'm sure.
Yes, you will. Keep
All right.
up the good work out there, my man.
Hey, thank you very much. Take care, Colonel.
See ya.
Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil joining me for a few minutes on Top Story this morning. It's 9:41 right now at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Look, he's responding to a fellow who called in the show about, not quite an hour ago, and who called yesterday as well and has been insisting Dick Cheney is the mastermind behind 9/11 and that the Afghan war was just a waste because of that and all of those lives were wasted. Steve made a great point near the end of that conversation. To what point? To what benefit would Dick Cheney have gotten to have thousands of Americans killed at war? To what benefit would Dick Cheney have gotten to have thousands of Americans killed on that day in 2001? See, that's the part the conspiracy theorists can't answer. Well, Dick Cheney was behind it, and I know some other kook who put up a kooky video, and I watched that as being a card-holding kook myself, and therefore Dick Cheney did it. But Steve's point is why? See, you can't answer that particular question when you come up with these loopy ideas. No one got any profit out of it. No one ended up, as one caller pointed out, with the war in Iraq, nobody got any oil out of it. So your arguments just are really built on a bunch of sand, and it keeps shifting under your feet. I don't know how people on that that kook spectrum can actually continue to believe what they believe, and you can throw all of this at them, the logic at them, and even other evidence at them, and because they want to believe it, they're unable to actually accept anything else. 9:16. I do want to mention a couple of things before we wrap up this segment of the program. And Steve had contacted me just out of the blue, and I wanted to get him on the air to at least get his comments about that, because he has been there. He has been on the inside. He knows a lot of these people. He knows how this works. He's had the experience on Capitol Hill and in Washington and in working for the Reagan administration, appointed by the Reagan administration as the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission. So this is somebody who you can actually trust when he's talking about these issues, and I think you can obviously understand that he's a pretty logical individual. In the meantime, I also wanted to talk about some logical people that I know on the local level, and they help make this program possible on a daily basis. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off and scheduled, no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. That is 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. We've gotten off on a couple of other topics over the course of the last hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes, we'll call it instead. But I had been mentioning the story from the Associated Press, and of course I mentioned bias, I thought, in the reporting about the state's efforts to put together a transportation bill. The House Transportation Committee narrowly voted 9-8 on Thursday, to move $16 million in fuel tax revenue currently funneled to the Idaho State Police and open it up for road maintenance. Now, man, there must be a lot of hand-wringing going on in Boise right now, because as we've been told, it might cost a couple of $100 million to really do this roads project to the point that's needed. That is, to shore up all of the roads around the state, that are the secondary roads especially, that are in sad shape, as well as to repair and replace a lot of the bridges that may, after all of these years, have corroded to the point where some of them could be dangerous. On the other hand, the numbers being bandied about in the state legislature are nowhere near enough to cover all of those costs. So if you move $16 million in fuel tax revenue that was currently going to state police, what are state police going to do to make up the $16 million shortfall? Has that been a question that anybody is raising? Do you have to pull troopers off the roads? Do you have to cut back on patrols? Do you have to close a barracks? I mean, they don't necessarily call it a barracks any longer in most states, but no one stays there overnight very often anymore. But the fact of the matter is, if you're shifting it from one place to another, how does the other place then continue? Or are they implying that state police have $16 million they don't need, which probably is doubtful. I don't think that anybody in the state police would tell you that they have a lot of money sitting around just unused. And then it also mentions the proposal permits spending up to $10 million of general funds depending on new revenue growth. A second plan designed to raise registration fees by $15 per vehicle passed by voice vote. In other words, voice vote means, you don't have to put your name down, right? So when it comes election time, and my constituents say, "Did you vote for the increase in my registration fee?" Gee, I don't recall, because it was a voice vote. I don't remember it was so noisy in there, it's tough to remember exactly what I said. And then it mentions another House panel is considering this morning a 7-cent fuel tax hike, which of course I know you're all going to be extremely comfortable with, because the price of gas, as the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Yemenis, the Iranians, the Syrians, and the Israelis all start firing weapons at each other, the gas price is going to skyrocket. Why not add another 7 cents per gallon? What the heck? And now we're going to go to a break with the official Dick Cheney theme song. I have a lot I still would like to try and cover this morning, but I'm more than willing, because it has been such an unusual day, perhaps the most unusual in the last 3 months I've been doing this, to take some of your telephone calls and reactions. Also, you can include emails too if you like. My email address, bill.colley @townsquaremedia.com. That last name is spelled Colley. You can also reach me by telephone, 0300. That is 736-0300. And we seem to be just opening the phones to anything today. I say that because, first of all, any comments about Dick Cheney and Area 51 and the Abenaki or whatever they're called, or Anunnaki, we're not normally talking about that here. Those are completely off topic. But, of course, you always have these people out there, these single issue people, especially the insane, who think that this is their opportunity to get on the radio and shout about whatever their particular point of view happens to be. So from here on out, the rest of today, and this will not happen every day, it will not happen every Friday as well, but if you are so inclined, you have that opportunity to join me from now until, 10 o'clock or so. We'll have a couple of other breaks, of course, in between here and then. We've got Mike Huckabee coming up, in fact, in the next half hour, and that always is a worthwhile stop so we can listen to that. And I also would like to, if I could, for a couple of minutes, make a reference to a discussion we had yesterday on the air about people who are of the same-sex persuasion. A new study out that backs up one of the claims we were making yesterday during the course of the program. But we'll get there. 42 at 9:25. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller joining us now. You're on the air.
Hi, Bill. Thinking back on Cheney with the phony war that we had, I remember a couple years ago people were saying he was tied into Halliburton and making lots of money, and that seemed to be a big conspiracy.
Now, phony war in what sense?
Well, the war in Iraq.
And that was phony in what sense? Were they using rubber bullets?
No. No, I didn't mean it that way. What I meant is he started it in order to enrich himself.
Oh, do you have any evidence of that?
No, the conspiracists did.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't personally. I don't believe
Halliburton. Halliburton started out as a company known as Brown and Root. They were the people who actually financed Lyndon Johnson's political career.
Okay.
They are from Texas. They financed Lyndon Johnson's political career. And Lyndon Johnson, of course, was of a completely different political stripe than Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, on the other hand, may have at one time worked for the company or done some consulting work with them, but is that unusual in politics when you're between jobs? No. Thirdly, look, my brother-in-law wanted a contract over there, too, because he had a business himself doing repairs and sheetrock and the like and painting, but you know what? He couldn't figure out how to float his pickup truck across the ocean. But on the other hand, Halliburton was big enough that they could do all of that.
Sure.
So when we keep hearing about Halliburton from these people, well, tell you what, Joe down the street, who's a pretty good businessman, he doesn't have the wherewithal, though, to get over there and do all of the repair work.
Okay.
So you go with a big company because they know how to fly in there and get everything done, right?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just know Cheney took a lot of heat on that, and I don't think it was deserved at all. I didn't believe it then, but that was the big Art Bell type news that you'd hear late at night.
Yes,
so,
remember.
Yeah.
Art Bell and George Norrie and all of those people, they've made a huge amounts of money on paranoia and fear.
Absolutely.
Hey, I thank you very much for your call. Even Alex Jones, who we've had callers reference, I don't dislike Alex Jones. I remember watching video of Alex Jones outside a Bilderberger conference a couple of years ago. It was not only great theater, but he really put people on notice who were going to these meetings by identifying them as they were driving by his position going through the main gate. On the other hand, Alex Jones was signaling a couple of weeks ago about this story, that we're going to have special forces doing operations in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, and Utah. Essentially what was captured after the Mexican War, right? But they're doing these exercises, according to he and his guests, because this is going to be the takeover, martial law that will be coming to this part of the country. Now, I also saw a video yesterday where somebody said, no, this is done because you have a vast, wide open territory with all sorts of different terrain. It's a great area to train in. And the reason they've notified local sheriff's department and police departments is because they'd like to know what these troops are doing suddenly come marching through their town. So at least the local PDs won't, have a conniption when they see something like this going on unexpectedly. Thirdly on all of this, Alex Jones has been telling us these stories for years. And so there may be some validity to all of this, but you realize how many false alarms does he have to have? Remember the guy, his name was Miller, I think it was. Back in the 1840s, he calculated the rapture, and he and all of his followers went out on a hill and they waited for rapture? It didn't happen. So when he was questioned, he said, a couple of mistakes in my calculations. So he set a new date. They went back out on the hill and they waited for rapture. Still didn't come. And after 3 or 4 of these failed raptures, his followers started to desert him, and he kind of faded away as a religious prophet. I'm just telling you, Jones may be sincere. He may have some sources, though, who are actually trying to create these false alarms for the day when the whole thing actually does come down. And that at that point, you'll think, well, they've cried wolf before. But if you think about it, Jones has predicted so many coups and overthrows and military takeovers over the last 15 years, none of which have come to pass. But man, he's gotten rich. 43, it's 9:30. Bill Colley with you this morning on KLIX. Just to keep you updated, we've been hearing over the last 24 hours that any suspicions that the pilot of the German plane that went down, and apparently he took it down on purpose, we've been hearing that we shouldn't speculate in any way that he was a member of the religion of peace, because first of all, his name was not Muhammad. He actually had, what was the name, Andreas Lubitz? Had a very German name, so we're being told, he can't possibly be of that faith. And for a while, everyone was saying, well, he was suffering from depression and he also had an illness. Well, within the last couple of hours, I've seen headlines that say, no, there was really no illness to speak of. So a lot of these things are being floated, but you're starting to wonder, why do they have to keep throwing all of these things out as speculation? Maybe there is some truth to the fact that he may have been on his way to becoming a Muslim, or that he had converted and he just had not yet adopted a Muslim name. And then Keith Ellison, who's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Minneapolis or St. Paul, Minnesota, the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, he is a Muslim, but he goes by Keith Ellison. He didn't change his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar like a basketball player did. He just goes by Keith Ellison, which was his given name when he was born and is on his birth certificate. And so you could have a possibility someone could have converted and still maintain a very German name. And right now, a friend of mine just sent me this link, and I was just looking it over, because I think that media will try to avoid this as much as possible, because they wouldn't want to point to a connection, as they try always to, they're apologists for the Islamic faith is what they are. But this comes from Gateway Pundit, which is a very reliable political source, very respected political source. And Gateway Pundit is just following a German news report. Co-pilot of Germanwings Airbus was Muslim convert. So he could have been working on becoming a hero of the Islamic State. In fact, there was a brief period yesterday where on Facebook there was a Facebook page in honor of him as a hero of the Islamic State. And within 90 minutes, that Facebook page had been discontinued. Facebook took it down because it was picking up all sorts of hits and likes, obviously from a lot of whack jobs in the Middle East and various parts of the world. But according to a German news report, he had been staying at a mosque in Bremen, staying there, almost living there, overnighting there. A mosque in Bremen, that's a city over in that part of the world in Germany. And if that be the case, then I think there might be some serious questions about his actual involvement and what he happened to be doing at that point. Also, Pamela Geller. Pamela Geller is she's the woman in New York City. She's a former newspaper editor and then talk show host. Pamela Geller, she's the woman who was behind, in fact, these billboards in the subways in New York City, calling out Islamic radicals and pointing out that there was a lot of support for the Islamic radicalization going on around the world right here in the United States. She put up billboards all over the subway system in New York. She had to go to court and win that court case. She has just won, as of yesterday, a court case in Philadelphia that will allow her to put up similar boards where she shows you the picture of the Grand Mufti back in the 1940s shaking hands with Adolf Hitler. The Grand Mufti was based out of Baghdad at the time and was the leader of the Islamic world. And so she has been trying to make the connection that these are very dangerous people. Pamela Geller actually got a screen grab off of Facebook, and it shows this Lubitz fellow sitting in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, but behind it, there's a big photograph of Islamic writing, whatever the heck that means. I don't understand the language, so I can't go into details of all of that. But that may have been the very same site, the Facebook page I was looking at yesterday, that had been calling him a hero, I was able to translate to French because I didn't know what one word was. I looked it up and it meant support. But I knew what every other word said, and every other word said he was a hero of the Islamic State. So you may well have a connection here, but just watch the handstands that mainstream media will do in this country to try to get around this if this is actually the case. Because they wouldn't want to give the impression that Islam is a violent religion. And then, if it finally turns out to be true, President Obama will come out, along with Angela Merkel from Germany, and all of the other European leaders, and they will all say, he did not truly represent Islam. President Obama is almost saying, I know what Islam is, and that's not Islam. Why do you know what Islam is, Mr. President? Well, hamada. Yeah, you get that answer out of him. Remember the story that time he was doing the interview? Was it with George Snuffleupagus? And he said, well, my Islamic faith tells me, and he apparently just, he wasn't thinking clearly or whatever, or perhaps it was one of those moments the truth serum kicked in. And Snuffleupagus corrected him. You mean your Christian faith? Oh, thank you, George. Thank you for being a good suck-up. Yes, my Christian faith. If that had been a Republican, and if the Republican had sat there and said, well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge my membership in the Nazi Party. You're a Nazi! We knew it! I meant Republican. No, you didn't. You're a Nazi. But you see, Mr. Obama's case, well, he's a fellow traveler. So Snuffleupagus just let him get away with it and said, help me correct you, sir. And then they tried to gloss that over and smooth over it. But that may tell us all that we need to know. About 20 minutes before my weekend begins. In the meantime, hopefully we'll take a couple more of your telephone calls. It's been a day for the Moonbats to be out. We'll take some calls, perhaps from some more of them too. 9:43 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning. A beautiful morning, in fact, in the Magic Valley. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A state near us, well, when it comes to the alphabet, has just passed a religious liberty bill. We're going to talk about that if we get a chance in just a few minutes. Indiana has adopted a bill to protect people's religious liberties. This comes from the Daily Signal. I get this in my email inbox every day. I would highly recommend you do the same thing. It's a great source of news you might miss from other sources. Mainstream media doesn't cover some of these stories with quite the same zeal. And I signed up for it some time ago, and now I'm getting it in my my inbox. I'm also getting a new one that I heard recommended. In fact, I was reading the Weekly Standard, and one of the writers of the Weekly Standard recommended something called Mosaic, which is a publication out of Israel. And I've started reading that. I get that in my morning email too, just simply because we're at that time period right now. A lot of interesting things are coming out of that part of the world. But the writer Ryan T. Anderson at the Daily Signal says the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act was signed into law by then-President Bill Clinton. That was all the way back 22 years ago. This federal law prohibits substantial government burdens on religious exercise unless the government can show a compelling interest in burdening religious liberty and does so through the least restrictive means. Hold on a minute here. The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America, which tells you have a God-given right to freedom of religion, does not come with any caveats that say, well, if the government has a reasonable burden. That's not what it says. Just like the Second Amendment doesn't say, well, if the government wants to ensure that they can cut down on crime, doesn't say that. All it says is you have this right. There are no conditions with these rights. You understand that. Freedom of speech, they tell us, well, look, if you, the old adage was, your right ends at the tip of my nose. So if you do yell, what was it Steve Martin once said, movie in a crowded firehouse? He got it wrong. He flipped it around. He did that on purpose, of course. But fire in a crowded movie house, then you are creating a public panic in that situation, and you are likely guilty of a crime. There is a difference in that. But right now, we have freedom of religion. It's guaranteed in the First Amendment. There's a reason it's in the First Amendment. It's among the 5 liberties guaranteed by God in that First Amendment. The writer goes on to say, by passing its Religious Freedom Restoration Act, Indiana joins 19 other states that have such laws, and 11 other states, too, have similar laws. If they're not quite called that, they do very much the same thing. So 30 out of 50 states now are offering protections to people for religious freedom. Why do we need this? because there are now numerous cases of photographers, florists, cake makers, and farmers being forced to participate in celebrating same-sex weddings in violation of their belief that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. These are citizens who have no problem serving gays and lesbians but do object to celebrating same-sex weddings. There you go. Biblical beliefs. No matter what the liberals try to tell you, I have read the book. You can have those beliefs if that is actually outlined in your holy text. Understand? That's how that works. Mike Huckabee mentioned it. He'll be along in just a few minutes, in fact, with the Daily Huckabee Report. But he mentioned it yesterday. Was it Pennsylvania? He mentioned a baker has been sent to sensitivity training by a judge because the baker refused to get involved in making the cake and pies, whatever else were needed for a particular same-sex wedding. So he's being sent to sensitivity training. In other words, a re-education camp. Let's dispense with the Orwellian language. It's a re-education camp. I was joking at a post, if you take a look at our website at News Radio 1310 KLIX, I mentioned there are things dying for that are not politically correct. And you'll see it. It's the one, if you look at the website, you'll see the lion coming out to attack the Christians in the circus in Rome. But I reference that, and I point out, if this guy goes to sensitivity training, and if he starts quoting Leviticus, are they then going to send him off to prison? Because he's at the re-education camp, he doesn't have very far to go to be locked away for his particular religious beliefs. I also came across this while I was sitting down in the last couple of hours before the show today. Identical twin studies prove homosexuality is not genetic. Now, the human genome was decoded a few years ago thanks to high-powered computers. And the result at the time was that there was apparently no homosexual gene. Studies have been done in Europe, 8 major studies of identical twins in Australia, the U.S., and Scandinavia during the last 2 decades all arrive at the same conclusion. Gays were not born that way. This comes from orthodoxytoday.org. Identical twins have the same genes or DNA. They are nurtured in equal prenatal conditions. If homosexuality is caused by genetics or prenatal conditions and one twin is gay, the co-twin should also be gay, but that's not the case. Only about 11% of identical twins matched up among men and only 14% among women. What does that tell us? Well, because identical twins are always genetically identical, homosexuality cannot be genetically dictated. No one is born gay, one of the researchers says. Dr. Whitehead believes, that's his name, same-sex attraction, that is SSA as it's abbreviated here, is caused by, quote, non-shared factors, unquote, things happening to one twin but not the other, or a personal response to an event by one of the twins and not the other. But again, no one is born gay. I used to have, when I worked in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, doing a talk show there, which is San Francisco East, I'd have these people call me up and insist they were born that way, or they would say, God made me that way. You're being very presumptuous there when you say that. But obviously this is evidence you are not born that way. Now, we don't know what causes people to suddenly go that direction, and it may not be something within their control. I'll acknowledge that right now. I'll let science try to come up with the answer on it. In the meantime, the Huckabee Report brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Thank you, Governor Huckabee. Coming up on 6 minutes now from 10 o'clock, Rush Limbaugh following news from Fox at 10 o'clock, Sean Hannity at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Glenn Beck at 4 o'clock this afternoon as well. And then this evening, Dave Ramsey right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 45 at our studios this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story for just a few more minutes. Can I do a quick follow-up to what I was talking about religious freedom in this country from a few minutes ago? We have had in place for 61 years in this country a law. I was talking about the aforementioned Lyndon Johnson. Last half hour of the program, in fact. He was behind a law passed in 1954 that hamstrung clergymen from talking about politics from the pulpit. And we have had that rule in place ever since. And what happens is, what would happen if you actually talked about politics, the IRS could come in and throw the book at you, and you would lose your tax-exempt status. So a lot of the larger churches especially are frightened about that because well, let's say you're a member of the United Methodist Church and you speak out against something. Could the IRS come in and not only in that one church, but could they yank the tax-exempt status for the entire denomination across the country? That would be a serious threat to that denomination's existence, that is, its survival. Now, again, I don't understand how this happens if you have, in that First Amendment, 5 liberties guaranteed. Among those are your right to assemble, of course. That would mean gathering in a church. Your right to have a religious liberty, that is, worship as you choose, so you're covering that one. But you also have the freedom of speech in there. The other two, by the way, being what? The press and assembly. Or rather, the press and petitioning your government. But here's the fact of the matter. 3 of your 5 liberties every Sunday, and some churches are getting together on Saturdays, the Adventists. Some are on Wednesday nights, they have different services. So it can be multiple times per week. Some churches, such as the Roman Catholics, have daily Mass as well as weekend Masses. But the point of the matter is, there are no restrictions on all of that. I think what we really need to do is have more clergy in this country. And they tried this a few years ago where on a particular Sunday, some of them decided to speak about politics in large numbers, and nothing happened. But if the clergy in this country, whether they be from the leftist persuasion or the right-wing persuasion, if they all decided that they were all at once going to start talking this way, somebody is going to end up going to court. And once you get to court, you can start making the argument. And you can work your way, if all the churches in the country get behind this, we'll be able to afford the lawyers. Get behind this sort of a lawsuit or this court case. You could eventually take this all the way up to the Supreme Court, which would likely, and I think some of the lower courts would do the same things as well, they would say that there is no prohibition in the First Amendment that says that a preacher cannot talk about politics while in the pulpit, especially if it impacts on your religious life. An issue such as abortion, for instance, it's a political issue, but for a great many of us, it's a moral issue. It is a Christian issue in this particular case. And unfortunately, no one yet has really tried to challenge that. But I think if that would happen, you would eventually find court decisions that would strike down the onerous law created by one, the murderous Lyndon Johnson. And I say that because he was accused of certain crimes even before 1963. We would be able to strip that, and we would return the liberties and restore the liberties given by God to pastors across the land. 9:58. Bill Colley with you this morning. I got a premature start yesterday. I thought it was Friday. I think it is today. God willing and the creek don't rise, I am back in this seat on Monday morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. We'll have all of our conspiracy theorists along with us, I'm sure, too. Well, what the heck? Big enough boat for everyone, I suppose. And you always need a little extra ballast, too, now and then. It's 44. Rush Limbaugh coming up following news at 10 o'clock. Thanks for joining us.